Oh, there we go. We got it. Here we at. It's another day in the life. Another time to sit down and talk, to really just explore the mind, see what's going on up there, and try to get it out here. And I don't necessarily have a specific topic today, so we're going to popcorn around a few different things that just kind of been going on up here, upstairs. And so it's definitely rainy. I'm going to be honest, I might have to make an emergency dash undercover if it starts pouring down rain here. But for now, we're doing great. One thing that has been on my mind in the recent is how much do people actually make up you? Because there is all these sayings that we hear hundreds of times that have kind of diluted their meaning. But this saying's like, you are the 100 people you know, or you are the sum of everyone around you. Whatever it is, everyone says that we are who we interact with, who we spend our time with. In some way, we are the sum of what makes up the social group that we spend our time with, that we are around, that we look up to, or even the people that we don't necessarily look up to. These people influence us. But to what extent actually is that? I've been really interested in this because I've had a personal relationship that I've kind of continued to look back on, and it just seems impossible that this relationship with this person is so perfect. It's great. We have not necessarily the same ideas, but it's almost this mind converge where I'm talking about one thing and they've already been talking about it. You know, it's already been on their mind. It's something that they've interacted with. And it's just this constant converging of thoughts and ideas. And I wonder, were they always like this? Was I always like this? Or is it simply because over the years we've spent so much time together interacting with each other's ideas that we have created the person, both separate individuals that we are today, in a new way? And since we both played a part in creating this new version of ourselves, of course we're going to end up converging more and more on the same ideas, or even some of the same life events, some of the same life questions. That I find really, really interesting. That I don't necessarily have a complete and full answer to as of yet. If I'm being honest, it is something that I'm still mulling over. But I take this experience in my life with this one specific person, and I'm now looking at others because it was very obvious in this situation. At least for me, it was. And now I'm looking to find the less obvious things out there, the less obvious relations that I have to people in which we have changed one another, or maybe sometimes it's more one way than it is the other. One person changes and evolves more as effect of the other person rather than both equally converging in the middle. And yeah, it's a lot of, I don't want to say hypothetical psychology, but I guess it's real world, but I'm sitting here, I'm not studying the theory of psychology. I'm not learning about all the scientific knowledge out there, but I'm just sitting here and trying to comprehend the own exhibit of psychology that sits before me through all of my connections, all of my relations. And it's a lot, if I'm being honest. It's a lot. It is very interesting, and I try to kind of take it step by step, really sit down and give it the time once the questions do pop up. But yeah, I guess my question for you all, anyone listening to this, is do you have a specific person in your life that you feel, you converge on things too often almost? There's too many coincidences. And I am not one to believe in a greater source of, things happening there. I don't believe in any sort of master plan that things are just unfolding because it's how it's supposed to go. I'm very much a happen chance kind of guy. Things happen in the world, and if they didn't happen as often, we wouldn't see them as being so coincidental. So it's only coincidental because, yeah, it doesn't happen very often, but that doesn't mean that it couldn't happen at all. And so, as I look at this situation and I just see too many things being too coincidental, I start to think maybe it's not coincidental at all, in the fact of not that there's someone creating this plan or this thing's unfolding exactly how it's supposed to, but simply because I'm looking at it wrong. I'm looking at two different separate things, but it's actually the creation of our own selves that came through this relationship, that came through this really strong connection, that created this new version of each one of us. Yeah. And it feels good to be out here. It's like a beautiful temperature. I'm looking at some yellow flowers and just enjoying it. There's something about nature and just sitting on nature, looking at nature, that is very easy to the brain. I have heard something somewhere that might not be true, but I don't care. I'm still going to talk about it. That the nature is very calming for the brain, and many people say that it's quite calming simply because it is very easy for our brain to process. This comes back to a lot of the topics of the instinct that I've talked about before. The fact that we are still kind of monkey brains. We're still animals, just like the rest of the animal kingdom out there. And so we can't expect ourselves to not be affected by the multitude of different instincts that we had that maybe helped us back then, but now in our today social lives aren't that helpful. And the fact that nature can be so calming and relaxing probably comes from the fact that it's just simply easy for our brain to process. Because as animals back in the day, nature was the only thing that we needed to process, because that was pretty much the only thing that existed. I mean, it was the only thing that existed was other natural beings. Before we created synthetics, before we, turned rocks into dust and then made concrete out of that, before we invented screens and lights and all these different things that move away from a very natural understanding of what a thing is, because we start to create something that kind of goes outside of the box of everything that the natural world has created, in a sense. Coming back to nature and being in nature simply is less for the brain to process, and thus a de-stress in a way. But being in a very man-made like environment consistently is very stressful, because you have a lot of things that the brain needs to over process, basically. It takes one extra step or maybe multiple extra steps simply to understand what's this thing in front of you, which kind of makes sense because I can look into this super complex greenery that's behind me. I guess you can see this behind the camera here. And yeah, it's complex, but it's not overwhelming. Looking into the structure of how this camera works and how it's made is kind of complex and overwhelming, and it sticks out like a sore thumb, if I'm being honest, in the greenery here. And so if you're constantly in an environment surrounded by things that they just take a little extra to process, where you're sucking energy out, your brain is not necessarily over processing, but it's definitely has more of a load on it. I find that interesting. The fact that, the brain, when it hears the chirp of a bird that it's familiar with, will take a little less longer to process that than maybe a car horn or construction work going on, because it wasn't used to those things. Birds chirping, the feeling of grass on your feet, the wind blowing. Those are all things that we are made to process from the very beginning. But this day and age that we live in, for a lot of people, they have very little of that. They have more man-made in their life and in their surroundings than nature, which for me has been, for some of my life, more nature, and then for others more man-made. And I do notice the effects. I do feel more overwhelmed, just more used up in a sense, when I am in a point in my life where there's more man-made around me. And I continue to find that quite interesting. And I will just leave it at that. You can process that any way you want to. I just find it quite interesting that some people don't know. Some people live in cities their entire life, and the local park is nature to them. That's getting out into nature. And for me, who's come from living on a farm, living on multiple acres of just land, just trees, untouched land, and having that growing up for the majority of my life, and also having access to untouched nature in the sense of waterfalls and many different unexplored areas, it was always more nature than man-made to be seen growing up. And I just find it interesting that two people can have very different perspectives, very different labels on what nature is, because I walk around here now that I'm in Germany, where it's definitely more densely populated, in the sense that everywhere you go, someone lives there, or there is some sort of man-made thing. There's hardly any point within this country and within most of Europe that is untouched, so to speak. And I go to the city park, and that's not nature to me. I wouldn't call that nature, because these trees and all this grass is being planted and maintained, and where's the nature in it? Where's the let it grow, let it live kind of mentality? And so when I'm in those environments, I don't find that to be nature at all. I don't find, even this garden here, it's all propagated. It's on a more or less fake piece of grass here, not in the fact that the grass is fake, but simply because this land wouldn't have looked like it if it was untouched. It would look completely different. And the people who have lived with this entire life, of course that's nature. That's all the nature that they really get. And so they just understand it on a different level than I do, because we've simply had access to two different varieties of nature. And this isn't just about the nature. This isn't just about my experience. I say this in order to basically bring up the fact that depending on where your life is, what you've experienced, where you grew up, many different factors, you have a different understanding of what something is. Truthfully, different people have a different understanding on what is a human, what is the human condition. Different people have an understanding on what is nature, for example. Depending on what you experience, it will change how you see the world around you. And of course, we hear this, but to actually understand that, and to understand that when I see all of this greenery around me, I understand that it's real, biologically a living thing, but it's all propagated. It's all being handled. And I know the difference simply by looking at it between untouched nature and truthful nature, and then the nature on the other side where it's being created by someone else, maintained and handled. And if I had grown up in a city or simply a more densely populated country like Germany, then I probably wouldn't have that same understanding. And even if I did visit those truthful natures that I know and love, that I basically call home, would I even be able to get that understanding? Sure, I might understand that it's another level, but would I truthfully change to have the understanding that I have today? I would say probably not. I think it would take more time. I think it would take a lot more time being in such an environment. And so I personally take this as kind of a air of caution to myself that when I'm meeting new people, as a big part of me is helping people understanding their perspectives, understanding where they're coming from in life. They need to understand that what they describe happening to them is influenced by their perception of what a thing is. What is, we can even look on this on an emotional level. What is sadness? What is depression? What is happiness? What is joy? What is fulfillment? These questions can all have very, very different answers depending on who you ask and what they have been through in their life. Yeah. And all of that sparked out of simply looking at a flower. I think I talked for probably a good 10-15 minutes on that topic, just looking at a little flower. And that's the next thing that I'm going to talk about for a little while, is the fact that we have kind of learned to consolidate our thoughts, to rein in our brain and try to stick to focusing on one thing. But there is a power, a skill in letting the brain run free. This is basically what I'm training right here in this moment. As I sit in front of this camera, I don't have any single topic to talk about. And somehow I have to sit here and make something important. Make something, not just make it seem important, but truthfully talk about something that's important to me. Now, was it coincidence that I looked at the flower and I was able to stumble on a topic that I found kind of important? Kind of. But it's also the skill of letting my brain run free. I looked at the flower and said, wow, it's got a lot of color. And then, the brain pops by and I go, man, what is beauty? What why the heck do I like looking at a sunset? But if the sky's clouded over, I am not all too impressed. Why is when the water's like a deep color of blue? Why is that really cool? What is beauty in the human eye when we're looking at a natural sense? Why do I like those things? And then you just jump from one thing to the next and it's beautiful. That's your brain working. That's not overthinking. That is simply the process of thinking. You go from one thing to the next, and we've kind of shut this off. We look at something and we just try to understand it for what it is. And we don't move forward with another idea, another topic. I jump from things to things all the time. And it's a skill to let go and just say, okay, I don't know what's coming. I don't know where I'm going to end up here, but I'm just going to let it out. I'm just going to sit here and express myself and think freely. And I could sit here in silence for 5 minutes and just think. I don't have any obligation to talk right now. But it feels good to know that I have really honed in this skill of being able to just understand what I want to say, where I want to go with a thought, and express it through my words. And now I can always continue to improve the skill and find different little nooks and crannies to fill in and different facets to explore within expressing myself verbally. But I have the skill. I can sit down here and talk for, I think we're about 20 minutes in, and just be okay. I stumble over my words sometimes. It's never perfect. I never have the perfect sentence come out because I don't want that anyways. I don't want to sit here and read a script because that's what it would be. If I wanted to have the perfect way of saying every single thing, I would have a script in front of me with ideas planned out, and I would have many revisions of the script done. And even at that, it would still never be the perfect way to say things, the perfect sentence. And so I sit here and just blabble. And I implore you to apply that to your life, not in the sense that you got to sit down and record a podcast, but in the sense that just go out and do something. Just go out and blabble. Maybe talk to a friend, write something down. Look at a flower and let your mind run through 1,000 ideas. Jump from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next. take in information and process it. But don't continue to overload yourself with information. Don't continue to bring it in. Look at the world around you and process what's going on there. There's a lot to be learned from that. There's a lot to understand, to think about. You know, overthinking has been demonized, but by God, I'm an overthinker, and I'm very proud of it. I like to think things through. So if you're an overthinker, if you're someone who gives effort into thinking about what's going on in front of you, what's going to happen, I cheer you on as well. Now there's a whole thing about you don't want to let your overthinking turn into non-action, turn into holding yourself back from doing anything. That's a whole different topic, but overthinking in and of itself is not a bad symptom. It's a beautiful trait of the mind that says you have mental stamina. You have the ability to sit and jump from one idea to the next and question what's going on and try to understand it and try to figure things out and wondering how does that work? How did he do that thing? That's a beautiful trait. That is the trait that's going to help change the world. If people lean into that, if people let themselves overthink, let themselves think things through, let their mind run free, that's really going to make a big difference in this world. And I'm happy to do my part. I'm happy that you guys are doing your part because, I mean, if you're sitting through this, you gotta have something going on up there. I'm just assuming, but it's gotta be so. So, with that being said, I'm going to leave it at that. I'm feeling a little sprinkle, a little tinkle from the sky. So, this guy is about to go inside. Take it easy. Bye.